Welcome to Dr. B Music Theory, folks. I'm going to double check my computer right over here to make sure that this stream is working correctly. So if you give me one moment, we will begin in earnest momentarily. Looking good, looking good. Looks like we got the live stream going right here. All right, wonderful. So, welcome again to Dr. B Music Theory. I'm very excited about this particular video that I'm making right now because 2 weeks ago I announced a Dr. B Music Theory jingle writing contest, and the deadline was earlier today, and I'm happy to announce that the winner is Andrew Norris, who, for those of you who tune in regularly, will see him involved in the chats. He's watched these videos for a number of years and actually has used them to create his own music for documentary films that he makes. So he was born in England, grew up in England, and now spends a lot of his time living in Croatia and makes documentaries about kind of rural life in some of the smaller, less dense populated areas of Croatia. So he interviews people who've grown up in the same town, who sing traditional songs, and he's created his own background music and underscoring for these documentaries, and he's used Dr. B Music Theory to help him do that. So it's really awesome that he was able to submit something that really, I thought, did a great job of capturing what I wanted, and it was very interesting because he sent me two versions off the pretty quickly after I announced the contest. One was with kind of a string orchestra, and the other was a recorder and harpsichord version. Neither one of them had singing. They had the melody and everything, and he had sent a score that had it written out. And he basically said, "Oh, I'm just not a singer. So sorry, Dr. B." And I wrote back. I said, why don't you give it a shot? Why don't you just try and see what you come up with? Because that's really what I want. I want it with the words, because that's kind of what makes it fun and gives it what it's supposed to be trying to achieve. So he did it, and this is something I've mentioned a number of times in the videos, is that as musicians, we should all sing, we should all play piano, we should all play drums, some kind of thing to get us in touch with melody, with harmony, and with rhythm. So I'm really glad that he went a little bit outside of his comfort zone and he did something a little unusual, but I think it came out great. I love it. So I would like to play it for you right now. So this is Andrew Norris, the jingle for Dr. B Music Theory. This is it too. This is what he wrote, and we're going to analyze it after we listen to it. So let's listen to it right now.
Ask Dr. B about music theory.
All right, so that's it, and I just played it off of a phone next to my lav mic, so the audio quality is not is not going to be the best there, but you can certainly go, and I just posted it up on my YouTube channel earlier this afternoon. I posted it up on Patreon. I posted it on my Facebook pages and in the Facebook fan page. So you can go ahead and listen to it. I've turned it into exactly the kind of promo I was looking for. So I'm just gonna give me 1 second. So the beauty of it is it's doing exactly what I want. And this is something that's interesting for us who are studying music theory. Some of us I know are just trying to figure out how to pass a class. Some of us are trying to figure out how to do well on an entrance exam. But some of us are actually looking to be composers and arrangers. And this is where you have to learn how to take your knowledge and translate it into something that's going to be usable for a very specific thing. So if you look at what I posted, I took the audio, I combined it with a graphic that I had someone make up for me that says "Ask Dr. B about music theory," and then I put a little information at the end. Some of that information is going to be new to you, is because of daylight savings time and the days are ending a lot shorter. I'm going to move my regular Q&A. This is going to be the last one at 3 p.m. Eastern time for a while. I'm moving it back to 1 p.m. Eastern time. So 2 weeks from today, We're going to have another live Q&A, but it's going to be at 1 o'clock in the afternoon Eastern time. That way that it's not completely dark by the time I get done with this. And I can still go outside and see some sunlight, which is always an enjoyable thing. So my point there is Andrew wrote a great jingle. It was short, to the point, nothing, just the right amount of fanciness and the right amount of simplicity, so that I could put a little 10-second thing that I can put up on Facebook and on my YouTube channel that says what I'm doing, and it announces the new time, and it's perfect. So Andrew, thank you, wonderful job. And I had some other really interesting runner-up submissions as well, so I really appreciate those of you who submitted something. That was awesome. So let's dive in and take a look and see let's analyze what Andrew did, okay? So I'm gonna get out, let's see here, I'm gonna use this here. So he chose the key. We got 2 sharps. It starts on a D major triad. It ends on a D major triad. We are clearly in the key of D major. So we label that D, D, F sharp, A. That is clearly a 1 chord in our key of D major. So I'm going to go ahead and write lead sheet symbols as well. And Andrew immediately makes things interesting, because if we go to this next chord, we got F sharp, E, A, D. Now that does not make up a triad or a 7th chord. There's a non-chord tone involved here. So immediately giving us a little something special here. So what is it most closely to? Well, since there's 2 different notes here in this beat, chances are that one of them is the non-chord tone. Well, if the D is the non-chord tone, and we look at F sharp, A, C sharp, E, that creates a 3/7 chord, an F sharp minor 7 chord, which would be a 3/7 with this D as a non-chord tone. What kind of non-chord tone? We're going to label that as what it is, which is an appoggiatura, so APP. An appoggiatura, again, you leap and then step back in the opposite direction. So the appoggiaturas normally land on a strong beat. So it's landing clearly on beat 2. We're already establishing a harmonic rhythm of quarter notes. So this is textbook appoggiatura. So textbook. Now, don't worry, those of you who are afraid that you're not going to have any unexpected things that are difficult to analyze. He does do some unusual things that are not textbook, and we're going to talk about all of those. So what happens next? We then go to G, D, G, B. Well, that's at least a textbook 4 chord, and we know that 3 often goes to 4. 3 as in terms of harmonic progression will either go to 6 or 4 most commonly. So harmonic progression, exactly textbook. And if we look here at this F sharp in the bass, that is a non-chord tone. You could call it the 7th, but the harmonic rhythm doesn't really support calling that a 7th chord, but it does support calling it a passing tone. So we have a passing tone in the bass. Again, these non-chord tones are often really help propel the music, make it a little bit more sophisticated, a little bit more interesting. So speaking of interesting, let's look at beat 4, because this is where it really does start to diverge from the more traditional aspects. We have E, C sharp, E, A. So that is a major triad with E in the bass. So we would call that, let me do this nice and neatly, 5, 6, 4. Now, for those of you who remember my videos on 6/4 chords, second inversion triads, they have very specific rules on how you're supposed to use them. You either are supposed to use it as a passing 6/4, a neighbor 6/4, which some people also call a pedal, or a cadential 6/4. You are not supposed to use second inversion triads in other ways. Or let me rephrase that. It's not that you're not supposed to. It's that it's not normal that you're going to use a second inversion triad in any other way than these three options here. And the reason for that is because second inversion is so unstable that it can very easily sound like a chord that it's not. So if you were to say E, A, C sharp, is that really an E major triad? So let me do it like this, right? Is that really an E major triad with a suspension, an A being suspended? And let me rewrite this so it's a little clearer. I would like to do the A here and the C sharp here. Are these A and C sharps, are these suspensions where the C sharp's going to go to a B and the A is going to go to a G sharp? And then what we're really talking about is an E major triad, and that what appears to be a second inversion A major triad is really just these little two parts suspended above a root position triad. The power of that bass being so fundamental, and the instability of the second inversion triad being so unstable that it really wants to go somewhere. And this is essentially the whole crux of what a cadential 6/4 is. And so part of the reason the second inversion triads have these fairly strict rules on how you're supposed to use them is because of that instability and how it doesn't necessarily sound like a one chord. A cadential 6/4 doesn't really sound like a tonic triad in second inversion going to a 5 chord. It sounds a bit more like a 5 chord that has these two notes suspended above it that then resolve. So with that in mind, we're going to say, well, what kind of 6/4 chord is this? And it doesn't really easily fit into one of these options. It kind of fits, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. But if we keep analyzing, we would then say that this D is a passing tone in the bass, that we have a D here in the tenor, and that looks like it steps up and then leaps down, so that would be an escape tone. The E maintains, then we have a B up here. This steps up and then leaps, so just like this, the C sharp and the A, these create the interval of a 6, and we know that parallel 6s are just really effective in music. So this parallel 6, two kind of like escape tones that kind of move against a passing tone, which happens to create an octave with this. So one of the things to keep in mind is when you do write more than one non-chord tone at the same time, they need to relate to each other in a somewhat consonant manner most of the time. There are exceptions, but you'll notice that what Andrew did here is that he said, okay, I'm going to do the C sharp and this A. We get what you get that. It steps up to the non-chord tone, then leaps down into the resolution, quote unquote resolution, because it gets more sophisticated here, but that's the general shape of what we're expected. But it creates consonances amongst the multiple non-chord tones. So when you start off working and learning non-chord tones, I recommend you only do one non-chord tone at a time, because it's easier as you're learning the fundamentals. But as you get those fundamentals down pat, then you can do things like this, where you're writing multiple non-chord tones at the same time, but they create consonances amongst themselves. So it's almost like you could analyze that and a 4. You could try to analyze it as a chord. It would be tricky because you got the E in here, and you don't do that because the harmonic rhythm has already been established as the quarter note. So we know that analyzing the and a 4 doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense. The only exception for that would be if the progression itself warrants having that analysis. So meaning if we had a chord here and a chord here, like let's say a chord on beat 4 that made sense, a chord on beat 1 where you're like, well, it doesn't make sense for that chord on beat 4 to go to that other chord on beat 1 unless you analyze that upbeat. And in that case, you sometimes will. This is not one of those cases. So let's keep moving forward. We look here, we got C sharp, A, E, F sharp. And I'm like, well, what can we make of this? Well, we got a couple options. We got a couple options on that one. we could, and let me jot down those notes, right? We could say F sharp, A, C sharp, E. And we have another 3/7 chord, but this time in an inversion. So that's one option, right? Another option, let me erase this part here, is to say, well, what do we have? What do we have if we look at that upbeat? Well, we have B, A, D, G. Well, that doesn't create any kind of, that would definitely mean that there's a non-chord tone in there. So I think that we're essentially going to go with that, and I think that makes sense. Again, having 3 in inversion is a little bit unusual, and having this 5/6/4 chord not easily fall into one of these 3 options is something we're going to have to discuss. But if we look at it and we say, okay, that's a 3 chord, and it's in second inversion, so we would say F sharp minor 7 with C sharp in the bass. What that would mean is that we have another passing tone here on the and we know that Bach does this a lot, where you'll have this descending scale with the passing tones, and it's this descending scale is the hint on why this somewhat unusual second inversion 5/6/4 chord going to the 3/4/3, why it works. It's that power of the scale. A descending scale has such goal-oriented momentum that if you can harmonize something and make it vertically line up as something consonant, your ear is going to say, yeah, okay, maybe it's not the way I would expect to hear a second inversion triad or necessarily a certain progression, but the ear translates it and says, well, that works. And I think that's exactly what's happening here. You could then say that this is also a passing tone right here. So we got the passing tone B. We got another passing tone here. And then a passing tone in the soprano. So you have all the passing tones happening on the and to keep, again, and passing tones help keep that momentum going. If we look at it, we have B and D and G sharp and G natural. So this is like a G major triad on the and of 1. So remember how I said a moment ago that if you're going to have multiple non-chord tones happening at the same time, that they should create their own chord. So it does. This is like a G major triad, but then you'd say, well, there is an A that keeps going right here, this A in the tenor. So you don't necessarily do that as a Roman numeral analysis. The idea behind a Roman numeral analysis is to try to indicate the function and how things are working. So let's keep going, and maybe we can get some more insight into how things are working. Here we have A, F sharp, C sharp, A. Well, that is an F sharp minor triad with A in the bass. So a 3 chord in first inversion. And many of you who've watched my videos will say, Dr. B, didn't you say that both 3 and 6 should only occur in root position? And the answer is yes. That is absolutely what the norm is. And in part because when you put a 3 chord in first inversion, it can almost sound like a 5 chord. This F sharp sounds like it could go down to it. This F sharp feels like it could just move down to an E, and all of a sudden we'd have a 5 chord, because A, C sharp, A, if we just move this F sharp down to an E, it would sound like a 5 chord. So one of the reasons it's so rare to find 3 in first inversion is because it's so similar to sounding like a 5 chord. So if we go, that's a 3/6 chord, right? Now it's a 5 chord. So if I go 1, 4, 3, 6, 5, right? It doesn't really sound like a 3 chord like we normally would, because that A in the bass is so powerful. It screams dominant. It screams a 5 chord. So it's almost as if you're saying a disguised 5 chord. But in this case, it's a little trickier because we actually had a 3-4-3, we had a 3-7 here. So there's a big emphasis in what Andrew wrote on the 3 chord. So this 3 chord is forming a very important part of this piece. So let's keep analyzing. If we go to beat 3, we got G, B, C sharp continues, right? This is a mistake that sometimes you might make when you're analyzing a piece, especially on a test or an exam, or even just analyzing a score, is you'll just look here and you'll say, well, I just see G, B, and D. It's a 4 chord, nothing special, and forget about the note that's being sustained. But I think it is a 4 chord in essence, and this C sharp is being held over, and if we look at where it's going to resolve, it resolves up. So that is called, right here, would be the C sharp starts off as a chord tone. It gets sustained, so when you get right here, it becomes a retardation, R-E-T. Means it's going to resolve up by step. Now, it becomes a little trickier than that because the chord changes on beat 4, and we're going to call this a 4 chord. It changes on beat 4 so that it's not resolving into that 4 chord as we would expect. So we have this A in the bass, the B sustains, we have the D sustaining, the C sharp is still there. So if I were to just look at those notes, I would say I've got G, I'm on beat 4. I've got A in the bass, I've got a C sharp that's still being sustained in the alto, I've got a B, and I've got a D. Well, A, B, C, D, it's a scale spread out. So if you look at it like that, it doesn't make a lot of sense. So what we have to do in a situation like this is we have to remember that the bass note is so fundamental for creating what we expect in terms of harmony. And so when we hear, as a bass line, and we look where it's going, it sounds so like sol, do, 5-1. So even though the upper voices don't clearly outline or indicate a 5 chord, the power of that bass line down the scale to 5-4-5-1, or scale degrees 5-4-5-1, that alone is going to make our ears hear this as a dominant chord. So then the problem becomes, well, how do we make sense of these non-chord tones? So that means that the B turns from a chord tone into a non-chord tone. And there's a little something thematic here. Just like this C sharp turned into a non-chord tone, this B turns into a non-chord tone, and this D turns into a non-chord tone. So sometimes when you do something unusual, if you do it just once, it sounds like a mistake because the listener hears it, says, well, I didn't expect that. Was that just some random mistake? But if you repeat it, you can often, then it becomes clear, well, this is intentional. And then the brain, and again, this is all happening subconsciously in the listener's brain says, well, is there a method to the madness? And it starts to hear that, oh, we start something in chord, and then that sustains, and it turns to a non-chord tone. Ah, there is a method to the madness. And so that's what's happening here. So this B becomes a non-chord tone. And if you say, well, it's prepared by common tone, and then you have this, it becomes a non-chord tone. So it's kind of like a suspension, because it's going to resolve over here. And this is kind of like a lower neighbor. So I'm going to call this a suspension, and this a lower neighbor tone, because it's suspended above that. So it's kind of like chaining non-chord tones. So this is a pretty unusual little spot, but we can kind of make sense of that. This B is going to go to this A in terms of resolution, because when we get to here, just a little jumping ahead, this is definitely a 1 chord. This is very clearly so. With all with the high degree of uncertainty right here on beat 4, this is the most complicated part of the jingle. as soon as you have that most complex, he instantly resolves it by a very clear one chord. Not just any chord, a one chord. So when you're going to have that level of unexpected and uncertainty from a harmonic standpoint, you don't want that to last too long, and then you want to instantly resolve all those things so that the listener is like, oh, that was exciting because it was I was worried whether we were going to resolve, but it did. And so that sensibility is what is achieved here. So the B is prepared by common tone, and it's eventually going to resolve down by step. So it's like this neighbor tone is like an embellishment. It's like it delays the resolution of the suspension. And so this is also looks a little bit like a neighbor group, right? So B, which is a step above, G, a step below. It's like an unattached neighbor group. So again, if some of this terminology is going a little bit over your head, I've got my videos that talk about non-chord tones. Look those up. But this is a pretty complicated use of those. Let's take a look at what happens here. The C sharp that was that turned into a non-chord tone here and is eventually going to resolve to this D. But interestingly, as soon as it hits this beat 4, it becomes a chord tone. The shape still ends up resolving itself, but it's a really interesting thing that happens. So again, beat 3. So beat 2, the C sharp is a chord tone. Beat 3, it becomes a non-chord tone. Beat 4 becomes a chord tone. So actually, I'm gonna change my mind on this. It looks as a shape as that, but I'm actually going to call this a pedal. I actually think that's a more accurate description because it's in the chord, it's not in the chord, it comes back and it's in the chord. So I'm going to call that a pedal. And so what that means is that, and that's actually a better explanation. So this D here, this is a, when all else fails, this one's prepared by step up and then leap in the same direction. That's no non-chord tone we typically see. So people will sometimes call that a free tone. Free tone. There's no rules. Just do whatever you want. It's a free tone. And then the question is like, well, why does that work? Does it work? How well does it work? Interestingly here, you get the two non-chord tones being a G, a D, which creates a fifth. That's usually not what you want in a non-chord tone relationship. You usually want a third or a sixth. And keep in mind then what happens here is it's chord tone, the D becomes a non-chord tone, and then it becomes a chord tone. So we have this same idea of it's like a pedal tone right here, right there. So it's an A major triad because of the A and the C sharp is what makes it happen. We don't get the fifth, but we know that we can leave the fifth out. We've got a pedal tone here. It imitates this. It's like Bach often will change suspension, so you'll have like chord, suspension, resolution, suspension, resolution, suspension, resolution. That's a typical thing. Here we have almost like a chain of pedal tones. So this is chord tone, pedal, resolve, pedal, resolve. So we almost have like these chained pedal tones, which is kind of cool. So let's keep moving and look what we have. So we got our one chord, and then we move here on beat 2. We have a D versus a C sharp. That's super dissonant. That's a major 7 interval. And so the question then becomes is this a D major 7 or is this a passing tone? I tend to think, I would say let's hold off on that and see where it's going. So if we go here, we get D, D, G, B. Well, that's a 4-6-4 chord. That's a pedal 6-4. So if you remember, I was talking about the, well, it's going to be a pedal 6-4 when we go here, which is a 1. But it's a little more complicated than that. So hold up for it. But that's essentially what we're talking about there. So here we have a very unusual passing 6-4. But it's essentially a passing 6-4 because of that descending scale in the bass. And here, this is a more traditional, though still, when we look at beat 4, a little bit unusual in terms of a pedal 6-4, which is kind of neat that we have that pedal concept because we have these pedal tones that are incorporated in the alto and the soprano just previously. So let's take a look. If we're going to come back to this C sharp in a minute. So very clearly, this A of the alto is a passing tone. So very much clear passing tone. And then here we got the D, B and the D, which is from our G triad over D. And then we go back to this A. So in the tenor, it goes A, D, back to A. And this A does not fit in the 4/6/4 chord. But I would call that a non-chord tone, and I would call it an anticipation. It's anticipating that next chord. So I think we're still staying on this 4 chord here in terms of how it functions. That C sharp then becomes a passing tone as well. And then we have clearly a 1 chord, and that's the same thing here. So, looking back here, is that C sharp a passing tone or is it a major 7? Well, I think the question then always becomes a question of harmonic rhythm. Here, it's clear that we've been essentially moving in quarter notes. Essentially, 1, 3, 4, 5, 6, 4. This is kind of 2 versions of 3, 4, 5, 1. But here we're getting towards the end, the cadence. And the harmonic rhythm is slowing down right here. So we have this 1, 4, 6, 4, 1, 1. So I think because it's essentially a half note here, and it's kind of being elongated anyways, I think it's probably best to call that C sharp a passing tone. So that gives you a complete analysis of what we have here and some of the things that are occurring. Got some things that are unusual, you got a bunch of things that are expected, and it's that balance, it's that interplay between the expected and the unexpected that composers are often most interested in. If you don't have enough expected, you're gonna confuse your audience, it's gonna feel uncomfortable, it's not gonna make any sense. But by having some unexpected things, it keeps it kind of fresh and interesting. So I'm going to play it for you very, very slowly here on the keyboard and kind of point out some of those things. So, right? So we start on our 1 chord, and then listen to how nice this sounds. Right? That leap up. That leap up is has such emotional richness to it, and a 3/7 chord. The beauty of that 7th chord going in immediately from triads. We immediately go from triads to a 7th chord with an appoggiatura to our 4 chord, which kind of brings us back into our more traditional area. Passing tone. 5, 6, 4, which is a bit unusual, right? Then we get that, So we're at that 5, 6, 4 chord. And we're back to that 3/7 chord, but this time in inversion. And there's our 3/6 chord. And you could argue that the 3/4/3 is, it almost sounds like that's the resolution. So it almost sounds like that it could be a 4 chord here. And this is something you have to listen to it, and it's almost like it's got a little bit of built-in ambiguity. And ambiguity is usually a bad thing, but sometimes if it's just a little bit, it can make things very interesting. So what if this was not a 3/4/3? And I haven't analyzed this thoroughly ahead of time, so I'm kind of working it through on the spot with you. So I don't have the right answer immediately, but I'm just thinking it through here. What if instead of the 3/4/3, what if this was a 4 chord? I'm going to erase this part here to make room. What if it was really a 4 chord here? and that this C sharp is kind of an accented passing tone. The A, and see, it doesn't make as much sense. So if this was the case, the C sharp would be an accented passing tone. The A would be a free tone, which again is pretty unusual because we just leap into it and leap out. So that would be pretty unusual. This would be a suspension. The alto E would be a suspension, and this would be like an accented appoggiatura, so it would be chained. So, the only reason I'm entertaining this is because the consonance of that G major triad is just so striking on the upbeat. So when we look at that, and it goes by very quickly, so I think my original analysis is probably the most accurate. Yeah, and so I do think that it sounds more like a 3-4-3, that it's an expansion of that 3 concept, but there is a little bit of ambiguity in the sense that it almost sounds like it could be a 4, and the same with the 3-6. There's a little bit of ambiguity of having that it almost could be a 5, in which case, we're going from 4, 5, 6, 4, 4, 5, 4. We kind of, there's at a certain level we're going back and forth between a 4 and a 5 chord, which isn't an insane thing. It's kind of like, it's not a progression. It's like 4, 5, 4, 5. It's like a back and forth thing. But after our 3-6, we get to this, and my hands aren't big enough, so, and that C sharp staying. Notice that we have a little bit of a spacing error. It's a little bit more than an octave. So it's a little bit stretched out there. But listen to how this then resolves when we have this. That's what we have on beat 4. And then we get this 5th on the and. And then everything's okay. And they get that plaintive, little hint of plaintive emotion there with that major 7 interval with the passing tone. And then we get the... All right, so we have a little bit of a spacing thing here. Unusual, little spacing thing here. Unusual. And it begs the question, is like, well, would it have been better if that wasn't there? Or does this kind of unique, this little departure, momentary departure, kind of give it a quirky quality that makes it unique and special? And so I think those are the questions that you'll be asking yourself as a composer and as you're making things. And very often when you're studying music, a good teacher won't necessarily tell you, oh, this is wrong, this is right. They'll say, well, is this the effect that you wanted? Was that a conscious decision, or was that something unconscious? And if it was unconscious, are you sure? And so all in all, I think this is a wonderful, wonderful jingle. I love it. Thank you again, Andrew. I'm going to now go to the chat because I'm sure we're going to have some questions maybe related to this, but we're now opening the Q&A up to any questions because we always talk about a wide range of topics. So let's take a look here. Andrew is here which is awesome. So pleased you liked it, and thanks for encouraging me to try singing. Absolutely, Andrew. It's like, your singing is good. I mean, it's you're not Pavarotti, but that's not what this kind of thing requires. You're not going to get booked to sing the next leading role in a Puccini aria. But is this something that will work for a short 10-second jingle? Your voice sounds great. It's rich. You sing in tune. It's awesome. So I'm glad you did it. Adam says. Adam gives a supportive sound. Pranav says, in a measure, if we have C in the bass clef as a minimum, followed by D again as a minimum, with G as a semi-brev in the treble clef, will those notes, would they form consecutive fifths? Okay, that's a great question. I'm going to come back to that, Pranav. So we're talking about, and I'm going to write that out on the board. So let me do that. Caleb, hey, hey, says hello. Yes, it is time. And gives Andrew, yep, Sam gives a thank you. All good. I appreciate you guys being supportive. Oh, Life of Brian, I still haven't done it. Thank you for the reminder. It's written down somewhere. As you know, I have a bunch of things in the air that I always try to keep track of, and I did miss that one. So keep asking, like you just did, and I will check it out. Caleb then asks, can you help me harmonize this melody that I'm having a real bad time trying to harmonize? I spent the whole week trying to come up with good harmonic progression, but I'm failing bad. Okay, yeah, we absolutely can do that, Caleb. We will do that. Andrew is saying this analysis is so interesting. There's so much I hadn't considered. Yeah, that's what I was saying. Like, that's the job that if you were taking like composition lessons, the composition teacher would say, "Oh, I find this is interesting. This is interesting. Have you thought about this?" And those questions are what then inform the next time around that you're composing something. You're like, let me be aware of as much as possible of what I'm doing when I'm composing a piece. This is not to say that you can't compose awesome music without you don't have to be aware of everything to compose something awesome. That's not necessary. It's just that it helps, especially as you start to write longer pieces and in terms of consistency. So if we think about the great composers in the past, someone like Franz Joseph Haydn, who wrote hundreds of symphonies and string quartets, like, for him to consistently be able to write a piece that sounded good, he had to have a certain level of awareness that might be a little bit more than is necessary to just get something good. I'm not saying Andrew Norris is a one-hit wonder, but we know, we've heard in popular music, there's groups that write a hit, it works, it's really great, but that's it. They never can reproduce it. And that's because at a subconscious level, they stumbled upon something that was very effective. But it was at a subconscious level, and it never became to the conscious level, so they just weren't able to reproduce that or do it again. They were not able to consistently generate songs or compositions that had that same effectiveness. So Andrew, I'm glad it was helpful, and I will be sending you an email, because as the winner, you get a 30-minute Q&A. We can go do on the phone or Zoom or whatever, and you can ask me any questions you want about music or composition or whatever else. But I'll be contacting you to set that up. Andrew was saying, I based the notes on the first letter of each word where possible. A, D, B, A. Ask Dr. B about. Oh, that's so neat. Ask Dr. B about. No, there's no F. That's so neat. Ask Dr. B. I love those games. See, this is one of those things that composers do sometimes. So like when they're doing like canons, or Bach writes something based on his name and stuff. This is like the little mental puzzles that composers often set for themselves, and it's just something to get the juices flowing. And this is kind of that idea of the marriage between inspiration and craftsmanship, where you need some level of inspiration and some level of craftsmanship. And sometimes you have these like little puzzles that help you with that craftsmanship area to get the inspirational juices flowing. I like that. That's a neat little. I didn't catch that. All right. So I think we're getting into some other questions. So that is awesome. So let me go back, and we're gonna start with Pranav for today. So it always hurts me to erase it. This one more than most, but it's archived on the video, and the audio is now on my page, so you guys can listen to it and hear it in all its glory. So Pranav was asking a question, and he was using the kind of a more European way of talking about note values, minimums and brevs, which is all basically talking about the rhythmic values, okay? So I'm going to put up a staff so that we can, since the question is asking about certain pitches in the bass clef, moving, and I think this is a question that I actually was discussing with my class this week about you can, whether you or not you can like hide a parallel fifth, or whether you're still really writing parallel fifths even though there's a disguise. So it has to do with where things fall rhythmically in that harmonic rhythm, which is something we talk about fairly frequently here. So in a measure, we have a C in the bass clef. Alrighty. A D in the bass clef. With G in the treble clef. Okay. So I think this is what's being asked. So I think this is what's being asked. So C to G, that is a fifth, and then D to G becomes a fourth. Now, here's where so this alone certainly would not be consecutive fifths or parallel fifths. It's what happens if you do this next. So let me make the question interesting for you all. And then we have a fifth here. So let's say we then moved one more step. So we have a fifth, it turns into a fourth. This is not a problem at this point. But then we go here and we're at a fifth. This then becomes a problem. And you say, but look, there was not two fives in a row. How can that be parallel fifths? And my answer to that is, this is a strong beat, this is a strong beat. The fact that you did a little something different on a weak beat is not sufficient to get the ear to reorient and not hear on a strong beat a perfect fifth, and on the next strong beat another perfect fifth. So this could be a D here. This could be you could go up to an E. You could change that and go like this, right? So sometimes people will say, oh yeah, look, I'm just going to go. I changed the I went from let's say this was a C major triad going to D minor. I changed it, so it went 5 to a 3 because I changed the inversion to a 1/6, and then there. And the answer is still no. It still is going to sound like parallel fifths because of the way it falls on the strong beats. So the only way you can do that is if the harmonic rhythm it's more separated, right? So if instead the harmonic rhythm, let me just try to. Let's say this went like this. I'm trying to do this. Let's say that we had clearly established a different harmonic rhythm, that it was a quarter notes and we had something else going. If the harmonic rhythm allows this to feel like another beat, another chord, if that did, then this would break it up sufficiently. So the question is really, will that, when I wrote it as an eighth note as an upbeat, chances are that's implying that it wouldn't be enough to feel like its own chord. But if it does feel like its own chord, then that's enough to break up the fifth. So Pranav, I think that's what you were asking. I'm going to scroll down here. So I think that answered your question. If I didn't, you can go ahead and ask again. But the short answer to your question, would they still form consecutive fifths? And I would use the word parallel fifths, and the answer would be yes, it still would. The little upbeat thing in there in the middle wouldn't be enough. All right. So Caleb, you were asking about harmonizing a melody. Okay, so let's do it, all right? So I'm going to just draw a double bar line here. So Caleb is asking. He's got a melody that goes in E, and I believe you're talking about E5. So if we're talking about, so this would be E1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So yeah, E5 here, quarter note, going to F, quarter note, and then half note G, then quarter note D, and E, half note F, and then quarter note E, D, F, E, D, F, and when you say B5, you're talking about, let me see here, 1, 2, 3, 4. Are we really talking about this one right here? Because I think that's the B5 that you were talking about. And then a whole note C. So I think this looks like 4/4 to me. So like that. So Kayla, I'm just going to scroll down, and if you let me know if I got that wrong, please let me know. But I think that's it. And Caleb goes on to write, by the way, I know that a descending F to B is a diminished fifth. Oh, so descending. So it's probably this. But the book I'm using, Tonal Harmony, says it's okay to use a descending diminished interval if you step right back after it, which I do. Yeah, there are some exceptions to that. So especially at cadence points, like there's a lot of latitude you get right out of cadence, and this does look like a cadence point. So that's a good question. Alrighty, so let's talk about harmonization. Right, and this would be a B4 because it's at C. C is the beginning. It's funny because like there's like an A and B below C1, so this would be B4. But let's take a look here. So this looks clearly like it's in C major to me. So that would be my first step. It starts on a note that's in the C major triad. It ends on a C. I'm going to put that as a 1 chord. This F, B, that looks like a 5/7 to me, right? So this would be a G7 probably. This would be a C major triad. Here, I'm probably going to do something different. When I have that leap, it's less jarring if it's happening within a singular chord, as opposed to doing, like, let's say a 4 chord on, if I were to do a 4 chord on beat 3 and then go to a 5 chord, it would actually be more jarring, that interval of a diminished fifth. So I'm going to make that a full 2 beats. Most of the time, and again, there's going to be some chords that I'm probably going to, that's going to be the question I'm going to ask myself is, are the chords happening every 2 beats or every quarter note? In which case there would be 2 in these half note, or some combination where it goes chord, 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 final chord, which could be another option. So harmonic rhythm is something I'm thinking about, which is one of those important things. So is that harmonic rhythm going to be for quarter notes? Is it going to be 2 half notes? Is it going to be quarter, quarter, half? Those are kind of my 3 options. Normally, you have a harmonic rhythm that stays somewhat steady. So it would be more common to have either the 2 half notes or 4 quarter notes. But usually in this style of music, we want more chords, not less chords. So if we go, let me give you the whole, so these are the 3 different harmonic rhythms. Let me give you like super, super basic, far more basic than what you're probably thinking, right? We got 1 chord for a measure, 5 7 for a measure, 1 for 2 beats, 5, 7 for 2 beats, 1. Super, super simple. Like, and I'm not suggesting this is what you do, but right? So this is like if this was analyzed at the complexity level of a nursery rhyme. You get one non-chord tone. Here, you get non-chord tones. So you get a passing tone, escape tone. And your harmonic progression goes again. Right? So keep in mind when we talk about harmonizing a melody, the Bach, chorale, traditional classical would give you a lot more chords. But other things are possible, like nursery songs. They just be like, yeah, we got passing tones. Look, it's connecting stuff. And it's sometimes worth doing a couple different harmonic analysis or harmonizations just so that you have, as a composer, the differences. Like, I've always made jokes that I should at some point just write a bunch of children's songs. And sometimes I just write these, I'll just start playing these goofy songs with simple chords. The harmonies change very slowly, and I try to make some fun lyrics. It's a good skill to have, right? And then you could say, well, how can I make it more complicated? How can I expand upon that? So let's say I wanted to do something more complicated than 1, 5, 7, 1, 5, 7, 1. But that's the general framework. I mean, that's really kind of what's happening, right? We got 1. We're going to start on 1. We're going to end on 1. Now, what if we were to harmonize these notes so that we're not getting so many non-chord tones? But boy, this would make a great, another great 1 chord. And so here, if we go 1, we can look at that F and we can say, well, that F could either be a 4 chord, it could be a 2 chord, it could be a 7 diminished, it could be a 5-7. Those would be the most common things. Now, 5-7 won't work. Why will it not work? For those of you who remember, it's because that would be the 7th of the chord. 7th of the chord should resolve down. So we're going to cross that out. 7 diminished, that F would also want to resolve a similar way. It would want to resolve down. So probably not that. So either 4 or 2 is a good choice, knowing that this G could either be a 5 chord, a 3 chord, or a 1 chord. So of these, 2 can go to 5, it can't go to 3, it can't go to 1. So it's either 2, 5, or 4, 5, or 4, 1. So let me slow down because I said that very quickly. The reason I'm eliminating 5, 7, and 7 diminished is that for those chords, that note F would want to resolve down to an E. And the melody doesn't allow for that. So I eliminate those options. Then 4, 5 would work, but not 4, 3. 4, 1 would work. So we could have 4 going to either 5 or 1. If we go to 2, then it would have to go to 5. So we've got really 3 options in terms of our chord progression. It's either 1, 4, 1 or 1, 4, 5 or 1, 2, 5. And again, we can put some chords in inversion. That doesn't change our harmonic function. So if we went, now if we go 4, right? 4, 5 is going to be a problem. It's going to be like parallel everything very easily. But we would put something in inversion, right, to fix that. So we could go 1, 4, 1. And that works, and that allows us to go anywhere on that next chord. If we went 1, I'm going to do 4, 6 to 5, because that helps me avoid the parallels. Or 1, and I'm going to go 2, 6 here for similar reasons to avoid parallels. Well, no, I can't do 2, 6. I'd have to do 2. because a 2, if 2, 6 going to 5, or 5 could be an inversion, right? So we could go to a 5, 6. The problem is with where does that leave us in terms of what we go to next. With that D, and again, I like the idea of writing out your possibilities. It's either the root of a 2 chord, the third of a 7 diminished, or the fifth of a 5 chord. And I'm not dealing with 7th chords in general. That lends, if I did, you were talking about 3, 7 here. That'd be Andrew's chord. So, you could, but if that was the 7th, that would be the 7th of the chord, and it would want to resolve down. So that doesn't particularly work, actually. So if we're looking at these options, we would never want 5 on one measure to go to 5 on the next measure. That would be like a harmonic hemiola. It would be going across the bar line, and that would sound very unusual. So none of these work particularly well. So anything that ends in 5 just doesn't go to anything really well. So I like, and this is for you, Caleb, I like the idea of going 1, 4, 1. And then I would like I like the idea of going to a 2 chord there, if possible. The question is like, let's see if we can make this work. This is going to be tricky. So I understand sometimes when the problem for you, Caleb, and I think the understand why you were stuck is with a melody that's this simple and this diatonic, that first harmonic analysis I gave you of like 1 chord, 5, 7, 1, 5, 7, 1, that's probably the best harmonic analysis. And to make it more sophisticated like we're doing now is actually a little bit trickier. Is actually a lot harder, I should say. So, and so we're actually almost tied in with keeping this unusual harmonic rhythm of quarter, quarter, half. Because again, going to anything that's like 5 or maybe 3, it's just rhythmically, that's not where we would expect those things to happen. And we got to go to either like 2, 7, or 5 here. And 3 is not going to go to any one of those. And we went to 5, like so it's just the way that melody is structured. It limits what we can do in terms of progression. We would have to start doing retrogressions, which is, it's not unheard of. Again, we can do something unusual. But when I see that D, maybe 5, 1. Well, this E is where I'm a little bit worried. So that E again is either a 1 chord, a 3 chord, could be a 6 chord. What if this was 6? And this is 5, 7. And that would be a non-chord tone, possibly. Or it could be a 2 chord. 6, 2. I could see that. And then this could be 5, 7, and then with a deceptive resolution. So let me see how that would sound. Let me just play around with that. And I would probably put some stuff in inversion. Yeah, I like that. I think that's, Caleb, I think this is a good option. And I would just put some things in inversion to kind of make it feel a little bit better. So I would definitely want this 5, 7 in root. So I would have, let's say, let's put the G down here, right? We go A. So we got and maybe I go maybe 2 6 5 7 1, and then here, because I have this as because the E is in the soprano, I'd probably stick with first inversion. But here with root position, I'd probably try to go to first inversion here. So if I went do 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 like that. So let's say I'm going I'm almost tempted to go to something other than 5 7 here. So I'd go to 1 6 here. Then I like the idea of going 5 1 6 because I don't want it to sound like it's cadencing too much. Bum bum bum. And I like the idea of keeping the contour. Well, no, I can't go back up to F there. But let me see. Let's go to a. Maybe I go from like a D to G. So I change inversions so that the bass line. So it goes from 5 4 3 to 5 7. Let me see what that sounds like. So here we go. Yeah, that works for me. Yeah, I would go with this, Caleb. This is how I would probably do that. And again, there's more than one option, but you can kind of hear as I'm describing what my thought process is that I'm looking to create, I'm trying to create a good soprano bass framework because that's like such a critical part, especially if you're trying to go for a more Baroque, classical kind of structure. And then here I got more of that kind of harmonic rhythm, and I was able to figure out how to get some minor triads in there as well. And I still have really good harmonic progression throughout. And then with this, none of these are these are all harmonized, right? These aren't non-chord tones anymore. They're all harmonized. So Caleb, I hope that answers that question for you. But I think this is all great questions, and I think this is the big concept I want to make sure everyone thinks about is the difference between, I'm trying to think how I can say this without it sounding insulting, because it's not meant to be insulting. But sometimes, like I was saying about how I sometimes hear children's songs in my head, sometimes we hear something that's simple. And that doesn't mean you're simple, and it doesn't mean you're not capable of being sophisticated. But sometimes what we hear is actually simple. And we should embrace simplicity when it occurs in a natural way. And so if we hear something that's simple in our head, and then we're trying to figure out these complicated chords to go with it, sometimes it's a little bit of a rub. And so sometimes it's good to just embrace the simple harmonic support for that simple melody. That said, there are some beautiful things. If you think of like Vince Guaraldi, where he's writing that music for Charlie Brown and Charlie Brown Christmas Special, and he does like this harmonization of "Oh Christmas Tree," and it's got all these kind of cool jazz harmonies. So it's way more complicated the way he harmonizes it, but he makes it sound so right. So there is a way to take a simple melody and make the harmonies more complex, and you get this really interesting interplay between a simple melody and a more sophisticated harmonic structure. And this is true for a lot of the early Broadway musicals, things that are written by George Gershwin, or, it's a melody that's often fairly simple, very diatonic, but all of a sudden there's these really cool chords, lots of seventh chords going on underneath it. So the complexity is coming from the harmony when the melody stays relatively simple. So this is a good skill for you to be aware of and be thinking about. So thank you for that question. Sam is asking about whether we could go over a 12-bar blues. Absolutely. So let's talk about a 12-bar blues. So 12-bar blues, this is common not only for obviously blues musicians, people like B.B. King or Eric Clapton, whether that's Eric Clapton coming at it from a more rock perspective, or B.B. King from a more traditional blues perspective, or from a jazz perspective. So the blues is a form that really has so much flexibility that it's found in there's many different ways to play a blues. So just let's look at it from the most common is a 12-bar blues. That's the most common form. There are other options, 8-bar, 16-bar. But 12 is the most common, and when I write it out, I like to write it out in 4-bar phrases so that it's really, really clear. And let's say we'll take C as our basic, our key. So you could have C7 for 4 bars, and it's interesting that in the blues, sometimes they'll use just a triad, but most of the time they'll use a dominant chord, a major minor 7, not as a dominant, but as a tonic sonority. And this is one of the things that makes blues have its unique flavor. So instead of just going, and you can hear that. You can hear it all as triads. I mean, you do hear that in music. But it's much, much more common to hear it as. So it is a 1 chord, but sonority is got that minor 7, and it kind of gives it this more gritty, funky feel to it. And I'm going to explain why that is. It has a little something to do with pentatonic scales, okay? Pentatonic meaning 5-note scales. But then it typically will go to an F7 for 2 measures, and then it'll go back to C7, and then the more basic form will go to a G7, F7, C7. So we go into a 4 chord, back to the 1 chord, 5, 4, which is backwards through the chart of harmonic progression, right? This is a retrogression. 5 does not normally go to 4. So it's one of the things that makes the blues unique. So if you hear this, we get 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 3, 4, 4, 2, 5, 2, 3, 4, 6th measure, 7th measure, 8th. And that's your basic framework for the blues. There are so many variations as well, which are worth keeping in mind. So it's not uncommon that sometimes we'll go to the F7 here and then go back to the C7. So sometimes that's a really common one. Also very common is sometimes instead of having that retrogression, you'll turn it into a progression of D minor 7, and then you move the G7 over here. So it's 2, 5, 1, which is a more common harmonic chord progression. Sometimes you'll put the 5 chord here in the end. So that's some of the more common substitutions. Sometimes you'll put an A7 here, which is a 5. If you're going to the 2 chord, it's a secondary dominant. It's a 5/7 of 2. So this would be 5. This G7 would be functioning like a 5/7 chord because it's leading you back. So the 12-bar blues just keeps repeating the same 12 measures over and over. So let me play all the added chord changes, the blue ones, ironically for the blues. So we got C7. So that's a pretty standard blues. So you have your kind of basic blues with the 5/4, or the slightly more common for, especially for jazz, to go the 2/5. So 5/4 is more common in like traditional blues or rock. Jazz will often go 2/5 to that one chord, and sometimes all of the styles will add some of those. So this 12-bar structure is repeated over and over. So there's certain things in rock, pop, jazz music that is super, 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 super simple. Form is that thing. If you look at Bach, Mozart, Haydn, form is usually far, far more complicated than it is in any of these more popular styles of music. Popular styles of music tend to be very, very simple from a formal perspective. And when we talk about musics like jazz, which is typically very complex in terms of melody and harmony and rhythm, it's surprisingly simple in terms of its formal construction. In a certain sense, it's that idea of like you need something simple for people to hold on to latch on to if you're going to do other things that are very complicated. And then in a 12-bar blues, this formal structure where it's like you do 12 bars, you didn't do it again, you do it again. It's like theme and variations is what you're doing. And very often you will improvise around these things. From the more blues vocal standpoint, what they'll do is they'll have like, they'll have a line of lyrics. You'll repeat that line of lyrics, and then you'll do something different. So, my baby done left me down in the dirt. And then you sing it again with a slightly different melodic shape to fit the chords. My baby done left me down in the dirt. And then you have the final four measures is like the response to that. I don't know what I'm gonna do. My only friend is my dog. And you might have that as your kind of thing. And that lyric structure of four measures of an A, four measures more, same lyric with variation, something different, is another part that goes into this blues, typical blues construction. Now, some forms of the blues will abandon this, but others will embrace it. So it's worth being aware of. Let me talk just a little bit about these pentatonic scales. So the pentatonic that would be most commonly used on this C blues would be C, E flat, F, G, B flat. I'll put the C at the top as well. All right? Actually, I won't, because then it makes it unclear that we're talking about a pentatonic. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pitches. So pentatonic is kind of coming from, if we look at the origin of the blues, we have a combination of African melody, timbre, improvisational techniques, combining with Western European harmony. And it's this kind of like two different musical cultures kind of colliding and then connecting and coming up with something new. And so the idea of this kind of that pentatonic being superimposed on top of the chord. Now, why do I say superimposed? Well, if we look at, what are the notes in this C7? The notes are C, E, G, B flat. And then we compare that to our pentatonic. And we say, well, the C goes great with the C. And the B flat goes great because there's a B flat. And the G goes great. But what about this E flat and F? These things are crunchy dissonance because we've got an E in the chord that is a half step away from both of those notes. Actually, I'm sorry, not a half step away. Yes, a half step away. That's dissonant. So's that. Those are two very, very dissonant things. The harmony and the melody being very, very dissonant. No problem. No problem. Right? So what it does is it kind of gives you this built-in tension and relaxation, which makes it really intriguing and really interesting. Well, we have everything kind of, the tonic, the C's line up great. And most of it, 3/5 of it sounds perfectly consonant. You got this rub here. You got that minor third versus the major third and the F. So the ear hears the pentatonic, and that has a certain integrity. Like that's super in our ears. And a lot of rock guitarists will use pentatonics, but they'll use pentatonics on where you don't get the crunch. So if I were just to play, let's say, like a E flat, E flat major triad, there's nothing that rubs a lot, right? Or if I were to play a C minor triad, right? The pentatonic holds together as its own kind of like sonic consonant sonority. And the C7 does. And what's interesting about the blues is that there's this little piece that conflict dissonance-wise. And so you have this really interesting push and pull. And I guess there's a lot of theories about how this occurs, right? So the idea of this African minor pentatonic melody orientation colliding with, to a certain extent, at least with the C major triad. So if we were just playing the major triad, the idea in part was that you have these African melodies going to European church. So the slaves taken to church, the organ player plays a major triad. Their musical culture normally wants to hear. And so you kind of get that. You start on that minor third and you move it up to the major third to fit in with the harmony, which is another common blues thing. So blues will typically either play the minor pentatonic over the C7 and have that rub, or they'll sometimes do that and then they'll take that E flat and convert it into the E to resolve it. So again, this idea of African melody and European harmony, and there's interesting dissonance there that then resolves when you get to the other part, which is one of the things that makes, like I said before, I know I'm repeating myself, makes the blues such an interesting construct. So this is something you can absolutely play around with, and this is just scratching the surface of an incredibly rich musical tradition of the blues, and there's so many other variations. But this is a good place to kind of get started and have at least a fundamental understanding of how a blues works. So I hope that helps, Sam. Moving forward and taking a look here, I promised I would always scroll down at the bottom and make sure I haven't cut out. So so far it looks good. We're still in business. And Afonso, just so you know, I put some links of Andrew's YouTube channel in the video I uploaded. And I'll put that in this as well. Andrew has 2 YouTube channels where he does these documentaries, and you can hear more of his work. And Andrew, if you have a particular clip that you think would be most interesting to the music theory people, you can post it on the fan page, or you can put it in the comments here. Don't feel like you're self-promoting yourself or being, a narcissist. I'm asking you to do that because I think it's valuable to see how you can take this music and then use it for something, a project, another creative project that you're involved with. And so I do think that's interesting, and people would be interested in seeing that. So Afonso, go ahead and look in the video that I uploaded earlier this afternoon. You can get those links. Andrew might post something if he's still on board. right now, and you can check it out. It'll be great. So Caleb also asks, am I familiar with Bach's Brandenburg concertos? Would I be a college professor if I was not? I would not. I would have my license revoked. So I am familiar, and they're amazing. They deserve to be as popular. Caleb says, I was listening to it, and I was amazed by how good it is. Bach takes us through all these key changes and makes us experience all these different emotions. My mind was blown. Yeah, I sometimes say this, someone like Bach or Haydn or even Mozart, Beethoven, they wrote so much music during their lifetime, like an astounding amount of music. It was their full-time job for, not for Mozart, a long career. He died pretty young, but for most of them, had a very long career, and they wrote lots of music. And it's and I always say that it's just not possible for them to be as equally inspired on every piece of music throughout their entire career. So just because something was written by Bach doesn't mean that it's amazingly great music. This might sound like sacrilege to some, but hear me out. There's gonna be times where some bishop or cardinal or someone asks Johann Sebastian Bach to write something, and he's feeling sick, his family members are sick, he's distracted, he's not healthy, and he's got to get the job done because that's how you pay the rent, and he does it, and it's good. I mean, the craftsmanship is excellent, it's fine, but it's not inspired. And it's understandable that it wouldn't be inspired, and it's understandable that not every single thing you write of thousands of pieces are going to be equally inspired. That said, the Brandenburg concertos are why I can make my case, because you listen to those and they are amazing. And they stand out from some of his other pieces. I mean, he's got a lot more than that that's amazing, don't get me wrong. Most of what he does is pretty darn amazing. But they really stand out. Brandenburg concertos are fantastic. I recommend them. If you haven't heard these pieces, listen to them. They are some of the best pieces of music that Bach wrote. And that's saying something, because everything he wrote was good. These are great. So I'm glad you found them. Yes. Pranav is asking, will there be composition competitions for subscribers in the future? Yes, there will be. I'm not sure when, and I'm not sure in what form, whether it's going to be a time for a new jingle or something else, but I do think there will. Some of the other people who submitted stuff did not do things that were notated. It was just a recording, which was fine. Certainly, for our purposes, I lean a little bit more towards having it when it's able to be notated, because then we can do what we did like at the beginning of this Q&A, which is kind of talk about it and analyze it, which is part of the whole point of this YouTube channel. So notated is my first choice, but I didn't limit it to that for this contest. But I'm going to think about it. I'm going to think about trying to figure out another one and what to do for that. So stick around, and I'll see what I can come up with. Now let's see here. Good. We got people answering questions. Great. I'm glad you're talking with each other. Caleb is mentioning a guy who composed a fugue based on COVID-19. He used the letters as a motive. Wonder what he used for V and I and O, since there's only two letters there that are notes. But okay. Alrighty. So Pranav is asking about classical dance forms. So let me see if I can pull open one of my books that will help us just get a little bit in there. I know you asked about this before, and I did promise to talk about it. I actually think this is the wrong book, so give me one moment, folks. I have some stuff that might be good. I didn't prepare something, and it's a big enough topic that normally I would want to be preparing a whole talk about it, and it's a very worthy discussion, and it's just a matter of when would I have time to when I have time to prepare it, because it is something that I would be interested in doing, and it is something worth talking about. But let me see if I can just find a little bit more information that can help you get started. And I'm just basically trying to look up in a music history textbook, because they're very good about getting, talking about the differences between the different Baroque dance forms. So that's what we're talking about, Baroque dance forms. So let me see if I can find this quickly, and if not, then I have to apologize and find the time to put together a nice chat and talk about the dance forms. Dance music, okay. So let me see here if I can find something that's quick enough that will be interesting and meaningful on the spot. And I'm thinking I probably won't be able to do something right on the spot. So okay, I'm going to go with the apologize, and I am going to remind myself. I'm going to write it down right here at the bottom. Dance forms. So again, I know I got a to-do list, and I got some listening to do, and I do apologize for not having that yet. As soon as I find the time to sink my teeth into it, I will. So I'll come back to that one. Alrighty. So someone is asking, how can someone compose Lieder? Saying, I was just trying to look for musical or stylistic patterns in that art form. So Lieder, boy, we're covering all the way from blues to Lieder in one video. I love it. So Lieder is German art song, specifically from the early 19th century, but goes into the late 19th century. Starting off, so Lieder, spelled like this, is a German art song. We're talking about the music of Franz Schubert and Robert Schumann as being some of the first who are really writing they're the kind of like the two big two at the beginning, but you do have other composers writing in Lieder later on. So this is like another one of those things. This is like a huge topic. Like, how do you write in this style? And I'm just going to give you some tips, and I'm just looking to make sure I am answering the question correctly. So first off, you need to listen and analyze some Franz Schubert and Robert Schumann. So for me personally, I like Robert Schumann's music more than Franz Schubert's. And I apologize to all you Schubert fans out there. I'm not dissing Schubert. I'm just stating my personal preference, recognizing that I haven't listened to everything Schubert's written. Some of it is awesome. So like Schubert, one of his most famous ones is Gretchen am Spinnrade. Let me spell that. See if I hopefully I'm spelling this wrong, and I know I am. There's like two N's or two R's, and I can't remember which one. But we have, and I can look that up for you. Two N's, NNR. So that's a great piece. There's another piece by Schubert that's also really, like, I think the best thing you can do if you're trying to learn how to compose something is to listen to that music, because that's what you're gonna that's how you learn the best. So Earl Koenig is another really popular. These are two by Schubert that I really like a lot. Schumann im wunderschönen Monat Mai. Wunderschönen in the wonderful month of May. Auf ein, is it? I'm trying to remember how all these are spelled. I think Auf ein Berg or Burger. So let me just double check here. And this is what you should listen. You should just go listen to all this stuff. And then get scores, which are available on Auf einer Burg. Eine Burg. So these are two by Schumann. So listen to them, then go on to IMSLP. IMSLP, which is you can just download free classical music. If you were to just start 2 by Schubert, 2 by Schumann, analyze them. Analyze them, and I did spell this wrong. Gretchen. So please forgive spelling. I think you'll be able to find it if you type it into Google. So what's awesome about Gretchen on Spinnrad? So it's Gretchen, who's a woman, and Spinnrad is at the spinning wheel. And what's super cool is the piano part imitates the sound of a spinning wheel. So this piano part has this like, which is like the idea of the spinning wheel. And it has this beautiful melody that goes over it, and the way the lyrics interact with the piano part. And one of the things that make Lieder so special is that the piano part plays a much more important role than just accompaniment. So a lot of times before people like Schubert and Schumann, the piano is just like play some chords, back up the singer. It's all about featuring the singer. Now I have nothing wrong with featuring the singer, but sometimes you want to give a little something to the piano player and like make sure that they get to do something other than just play basic chords. So this is kind of what Schubert and Schumann did so well. And they often had the piano imitate something that's going on in the lyrics of the song. So Gretchen at the spinning wheel has these running 16th notes that the piano plays that imitate that spinning wheel. And the Earl King is just like unbelievable piece where you have one person singing like 4 different parts, like 4 different characters, all sung by one person. You have like this elf king, you've got a father, you've got a son, his son, and then you got like a narrator. And you listen to like one person, and you listen to like, if it's a good performance, you'll hear these different voices by the same person. And the music changes between which character. It's like masterful. And you'll hear the piano going da 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 da, all these repeated notes, which is imitating a horse galloping. And the whole story is about how a father is on a horse with his son who's very, very ill, and he's racing the horse to try to get to the doctor because his son is so sick. And the son is like hallucinating. He's that sick, and he's like picturing this elf king that's tempting to come. The elf king is tempting him to come with him, which is essentially like death, saying, "Come, come, come." And the narrator tells a little bit, and at the very end, it's just like, oh my God, it's like, I'm not gonna tell you how the story ends, but I'm just saying, if you have not heard the Earl King, you do yourself a favor. You will enjoy it. In Wunderschönen Monat Mai is a piece in minor, and it like the first couple accompaniment kind of outlines a it's like this. It's like a major 7, sharp 5 sonority. It's kind of implied. It's not really. It's not. I mean, you know, it's more non-chord tony than that. It's not really a major 7 chord with a sharp 5, but it outlines that, and so it gives it this really like unique harmonic palette that you don't normally hear. That I think is beautiful. And then Auf ein Berg is it's just gorgeous music, and it's the lyrics. And I think it's important that you analyze not only the music but the lyrics, because it's so important how the lyrics and the music combine. when you're talking about Lieder, you can't just study the music side of it. You have to study the lyric side of it as well. And so this is about castles up overlooking the Rhine River, and there's a beautiful wedding, and it's like another one of those things where it's like Robert Schumann was like, you know, he had some serious mood swings, like bad mood swings, and so what, you know, when you take something like that and you convert it into art and you do it well, the emotional impact, like I'm just getting choked up thinking about this song, is just like, it's so powerful. So I'm not going to get into like how do you write lead in terms of like melody, text, and how you put them together. What I am going to say is listen to these 4 songs, get the sheet music, follow along, and then really pay attention to the role of the piano and the importance that the piano has. The piano has to be more important than just playing basic chords. You can't do like Mozart style piano. You can't even really do Bach traditional style of like organ playing. You have to do something that's more suggestive, more evocative of what's happening in the lyrics. So you're tying in music with lyrics in a way that goes beyond just the music theory of chord progressions and things like that. So anyways, great question. Thanks for asking that. All right. Let's see where we're at here. Clarify concept of unequal fifths. In particular, why can't we move from a diminished fifth to a perfect fifth in most progressions? Well, that's a great question, and I think there's a little bit of dispute on the idea of unequal fifths. So let me erase this, and this is something I'm gonna jot down in the corner because I want to do just probably a little bit more research into this before I talk about it. So maybe I'll put that on the back burner as well. So diminished fifth going to a perfect fifth, and the reason I want to just pause and make sure is that, you know, I remember when I was doing my original video on augmented 6 chords, and I did the whole video, and as I was doing the video, I realized that the methodology that I was teaching worked as long as you were doing augmented 6 chords in the traditional way, like based on scale degree. So if you're using scale degree flat 6 for your augmented 6 chord to base it on, as long as you were doing it here, the method I was teaching worked great. Now the problem is that you can base augmented 6 chords on other scale degrees. And when I did that, when you tried to do that, the method I was teaching didn't apply. So I thought to myself, is there one method that can apply for all of them? And I found it. And that's what's up. And so I redid the whole video. And so that's the video that's up on my YouTube channel, is the one that can apply to everything. And I kind of want to make sure I do the same thing here with these unequal fifths. I want to make sure that when I give you an explanation, that it's as encompassing and complete as possible. So that's a great question, Afonso. Come back in 2 weeks. And just as a reminder, 2 weeks, it's going to be at 1 p.m. Eastern time, so 2 hours earlier than this one was. And that's in part because it's starting to get dark outside, and you know, I want to be able to do some other things in the daylight after when I do these things. So come back, and I'm gonna make this my priorities: dance forms and unequal fifths. So I hope to answer both of those. Great. So Sam says Schubert is still my favorite, the Earl King in particular, but that's probably because I'm not advanced enough a pianist to try my hand at playing it all. Well, you know, there's a lot of beautiful Schubert songs, and when you're talking about Lieder, you also got to talk about song cycles. So the idea that you have a song, and the Earl King is not part of a song cycle, but very often you'll have a song that it can stand alone on its own, but it goes in with a set of like sometimes up to 12 songs. And they all they all go together on a theme, or there's something that connects them all together. And so you can really start listening to, like there's a Winter's Journey, Winterreise by Schubert. So there's a whole theme. It's about traveling in the winter and revisiting places that you had gone to with a loved one during the summer. And so there's all that song cycle. So you can explore some more. Just listen to music. I mean, this is one of the things that I think is so critical, is listening to lots of great music that can only be good for you. So go explore more Schubert. So Caleb then explains here how we're going into the COVID theme. So folks, I think we're at a nice natural break here. I've got a to-do list here for myself. I'm going to make sure I come up with a nice presentation for you all. So I've got a to-do list, and I gave some of you some things to do, like listening to Schubert or all that kind of great stuff. So thanks again for joining me here. I had a great time as always. Another congratulations to Andrew for writing the Dr. B Music Theory jingle, which I will be using for a while for certain. Thanks again, everyone. Wonderful to chat with you. Thank you for the great questions. Keep them coming. Store them up, write them down, so that in 2 weeks from now, you got some more questions for me, some more challenges, and then I can go get something to do and put something on my to-do list to make sure that I continue to evolve, learn, get better, all that good stuff. Have a great weekend, everyone. Thanks so much.